Kingdom Polemics exists to equip the church for battle against the kingdom of darkness in light of the particular threats of our day. Kingdom Polemics is about taking the cosmic, Christological concepts of the Scottish Reformed and connecting it to the ground.
Welcome to Kingdom Polemics. We should, by the time this comes out, officially and visibly be Kingdom Polemics. And so, finally, we are calling ourselves something that we now appear to be. As opposed to before, we were calling ourselves something that we had no proof, at least visibly, that we were. So here we are, doing more conversational interview style content. I know you guys enjoy the solo stuff, but you particularly enjoy the non-solo stuff. We have a return guest on here, Mr. Ryan, just say Pastor or Reverend Ryan Beasy. He's been on here at least once, I think maybe twice, I'm not sure. But just for people that have forgot about you or who need just a reminder about you, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're at, what you're doing, and such and such.
Well, Aldo, thanks for having me on. As you said, I'm Ryan Beasy. I'm the pastor here in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. Been here for about 4 years. Yeah, going on 5 years now. Before that, I was pastor in Mississippi in a town called Winona, about an hour and a half where Wes, one of your other previous guests, pastor, an hour and a half from him. And I've got 3 children now, a daughter named Dabney, a son named Wells, and another daughter named Charlotte, who came just at the end of last year.
Oh, wow. That's right. So how many months?
I think she's 12 weeks old today.
How you guys doing?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Getting a little bit less sleep than normal, but okay. I'm doing fine. Doing more dishes than I normally do, though, and
yeah. I couldn't say I was fine after 12 weeks. I think if you would have after the third baby, you would have asked me, "Are you doing?" I'd be like, "I'm here."
Yeah.
I haven't renounced Jesus. Yeah, the third one was by far the hardest. We thought, oh yeah, well maybe after 1 and 2, like the third one will be the easiest, but he was the difficult sleeper, all that stuff. So yeah. Anyways, so I read an article that you wrote. By the way, it's called Mid the Pines, right?
That's right. My Substack.
Yeah, Mid the Pines is the name of the blog, or whatever. Is that what would you call it, a blog, or would it be like a newsletter?
I think it's a blog. It's a Substack. I've heard a Substack is its own thing. It's not a blog. It's not a news. I don't know. It's free.
It's the Substack Mid the Pines. So if you guys want some good content that is written very well about different things, check it out. So yeah, I read it. And I was like, man, this is a good thing to talk about. It's a very relevant thing to talk about. And, it's also a very timely thing to talk about as we are coming close to, surprise, surprise, another annual GA in June. And so I think these PCA issues that you addressed here, it would suit us well to just converse about it. But before we actually begin to talk about what is there, I guess what apart from like what's in the article, obviously what's in the article prompted you to write the article, but what else would you say prompted you to write on this in this way?
I think we have had a number of really good years as a denomination. starting in 2019 with the General Assembly there in, what was that, Dallas, and then the St. Louis General Assembly, and then this last GA in Birmingham, where we were able, in my opinion, to make great strides in returning to our confessional roots. As I see it, it kind of got we got a number of different sorts of elders in the PCA. You have some who embrace our confessional standards and believe we just need to hold to our confessional standards. And then you have other elders who aren't as in love with our confessional standards as the former group. And it seems like we're returning to our roots. But at the same time, if you look around the PCA, you see all this deviations. I was meeting with some folks in the church I serve, and they were just quite discouraged by pockets and sometimes more than pockets of deviation from what we've agreed upon will be our rules, how we will operate, what we will do. And providentially, at the same time, I was writing a sermon on John 10 and reading John Calvin, and he made this point. It was kind of one of those, how Calvin is. He'll make 1,000 points, and it's just one or two sentences about how the wicked, they're always in a hurry. The wicked, they're and it's the devil who's driving them to hurry on. But the righteous, by implication, we can be patient. We're the ones who are believing what we're saying and saying what we believe. And so, we have the standards, we have the Book of Church Order on our side. So I think we can be patient. We can note, hey, this is an area where we need guys to do what they said they're going to do, or do something different. And so I wanted to take a realistic approach, not just hey, things are great in the PCA. Look at what we've done. We've majority of presbyteries are for these overtures. I want to say, yeah, there's some real issues of deviation. There's some real departures from our standards. I understand that, but let's be patient, because what is written is on our side. So that's where I was coming from.
Yeah, I heard. I think it was Ligon Duncan. I heard him say like a month ago that if what you're about is on paper, you always have the advantage. And I don't know, for some reason, I never thought of that. You always think like the advantage is not you always think, but just kind of like, I guess the knee jerk reaction is, if there's numbers, persuasiveness, power, prominence. But he's like, hey, if what you're making a case for is written in a an ecclesiastical standard, you have the advantage. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, and
I don't
probably, I remember, back in seminary, I was at RTS Jackson and got to spend a good bit of time with Dr. Duncan. And that was one of the things he said in seminary was, if you are confessional in the PCA, yes, we have things that we can be frustrated about, but there's nothing that they can't touch you for being confessional. Now, I think, since that time, there have been attempts to, say, well, it's a tone thing. You weren't nice in what you said. Well, tone policing as is a logical fallacy, and but nonetheless, sometimes does get a little bit of traction in the church courts. But yeah, and there's the old legal adage, if the facts are on your side, pound the facts. If the law is on your side, pound the law. And if neither are on your side, pound the table. Well, in the PCA, the law, the standards are on our side. And so we need to emphasize those.
Yeah.
And we need to emphasize them winsomely.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. It's funny because I was now I know we're not talking about these three things today, but I was talking with a guy in Chicago Metro Presbytery who he goes to that church plant. That guy who had the overture about CRT and the national partnership. That guy from Chicago,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about? So he's going to his church plant, and he was just saying, like, when I read the Westminster Standards, I don't get why all these guys in the PCA like have all these exceptions about creation, the Sabbath, and images. Like, to me, like, it's not, there's nothing ambiguous or unclear about how it's stated in the standards. And he just asked me, he's like, well, why is that? And we went on this, we went on this rabbit trail of different things, but I did tell him that and this will be relevant to this conversation. I think there's two things that I see oftentimes as to why things that are so clearly written in our standards that summarize the scriptures are missed. Is actually it's three things. I think ignorance and a lack of teaching and preparation for these things. I've met a lot of men who've never actually been deeply taught to think through the standards. They were kind of just rushed through, given study guides, and so I think a lot of it is ignorance. I think secondly, in the PCA, believe it or not, there is churches that are more conservative than confessional.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that there are biblical ethics that they hold to in the Bible that coincide with Presbyterianism, but the broader conversation of confessional thinking is lacking. And so when you see the rubber meet the road, the values of the church are less the confessions themselves and more just biblical conservatism. And then the third one I said is, well, there's just the general tendency of people to always want to test the boundaries, expand the boundaries, broaden the boundaries because they believe that is the recipe for relevance. Those three things, I think, is ignorance, a confessionalism that is subservient to conservative values, and also just the tendency of humans to err. But I would say that some of these things are more serious than others. And I think the stuff that you're talking about here is pretty serious. And the first thing you talked about is ding, ding, ding,
Well,
ding, ding. Go ahead.
If I could add one more thing to that, I think there's also a postmodernism that has seeped in where guys have this ongoing, I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance, but where they'll, on the one hand, affirm the standards, affirm, male only ordination. But then on the other hand, want to have quasi officers, women officers, and where they don't even realize it's not just want to push the boundaries, which is a human impulse, right? We want to go, how far can I go, or what's the least I can do? But then there's just not even an awareness of how far they are influenced. The use of language in our day has influenced their thinking.
Yeah. That's a part of it too. And I think it goes back to what you're saying about concept and language, conviction and practice, doctrine and I guess what you believe and what you practice being disconnected, and then also like the terminology not actually being consistent. Like it just reminds you like the whole thing about the first and second commandment. So the second commandment is, in light of who God is, it looks like this, to worship him. And the second, you begin to separate what you believe from what you do, your doctrines will inevitably become meaningless and arbitrary, and actually, not what you actually say you believe. So, I say, I believe this about men and women. I believe this about who God is, but the way I worship and the way I see the office and ordination and such has no connection to that. And I say that the second that your imperatival consequences connected to your indicative doctrines are arbitrary and not specific and precise, your doctrines will inevitably fall apart. And a lot of
doctrine
times,
and doxology are inseparably linked.
Yeah. And what I've noticed is sometimes it is changing doctrines that leads to aberrant practices. And other times, believe it or not, it is changing its aberrant practices that will then work their way back to aberrant doctrines. Yeah. It goes both ways for different reasons. And so the first thing that you bring out is the issue of female officers in PCA. And when we mean female officers, well, the one that's most pronounced, most obvious is the female deacons, right? So there are many people in the PCA. I say many people. There is a significant amount of people in the PCA that have female deacons, and then you have some that don't have female deacons, but they have deacons that have not been ordained as deacons, but they have been installed as deacons. So it's kind of like they are a deacon, but they're not a deacon because they weren't installed, and so that's the first thing you talked about. So why don't we go there?
Yeah, in the PCA, we've agreed to a book of church order, which includes definitions. There are some definitions in it. Now, the word deacon, and I talk about this in a different article, is used widely throughout church history. Nero is called a deacon. So the word deacon, we don't have a copyright or trademark or word mark on deacon as the PCA. However, in the PCA, what we have done is recognize the word deacon is used in a wide variety of ways throughout church history and throughout Christendom. How are we going to use the word deacon? Well, Book of Church Order, chapter 9, chapter 17, define for us how we are going to use the word deacon. And if we're not going to use the word deacon the way we've agreed in the Book of Church Order to use it, then how are we supposed to have a conversation? And so that's my concern, is that we aren't following what we said we're going to follow. And
Yeah. So female deacons is absolutely, unequivocally unpermissible in the PCA. What is permissible is deacon assistance to the deacon, right?
Sure.
I saw that somewhere in the BCA. I forget. But female, the deaconess, either actual deaconess or quasi deaconess, is not allowed. And if you're doing so, you're actually breaking your oaths and your vows.
A qualification there. You can call them deaconess. You can call them the Duchess of Lancaster if you want. But what you cannot do, what you may not do, is call her a deacon. You can't give her a title that we have agreed. There are very few things where we have reserved words for in the PCA. Elder, deacon are two of those things, and so you cannot apply to someone who is not had hands laid on him, who has not been called by a congregation, who has not been approved by a session, examined and approved by a session, and elected by that congregation. You can't call him an elder. You can't call him a deacon unless all of those things have been done.
Yeah.
But you can call him something else. You can call him legally. Now, is it going to? Now, I'm just dealing with what is the legal situation. Now, other churches, they may want to call. They might have elders, and they may have shepherds and shepherdesses who assist. That's not technically illegal in the PCA. It can be confusing. It may not be helpful, but it is lawful to use the paradigm of the apostle in Romans 6. So to call a woman in the PCA a deacon, to call an unordained man in the PCA a deacon, is simply factually inaccurate and both unhelpful and unlawful.
What would you say to somebody that says, well, the office of, I know that constitutionally it's out of bounds for sure, but I guess what would you say to someone in pushing that boundary, even though that's not an office of rule. The elder is an office of rule. Actually, the BCO does say that the deacon is not an office of rule, and so therefore, since it's not an office of rule, it's okay to toe the line of quasi deacon female, quasi female. I say quasi because people have tried to deal with this issue by not ordaining them as deacons, but installing them as deacons. So it's almost like it's technically not that, but it is that.
Yeah.
Which to me, go ahead.
Well, I would say that is an argument, and I'm not going to weigh in on whether it's a good, bad argument. That is an argument But this is not the place to make that argument, because our Book of Church Order requires that for someone to be a deacon or an elder, he must be inducted by a church court through ordination. So yes, you may believe that women can be ordained as deacons. That's fine. You can believe that, but then you need to put up an overture if you want to practice that. Because as Fred Greco has stated a number of times, you may not take an exception to the Book of Church Order. What's in the Book of Church Order, we have to practice. And that argument was made, related to adding that one little bitty sentence to the Book of Church Order about marriage. That, what's in the Westminster Standards is one thing, but we can take differences. We can state differences with the Westminster Standards, but we can't with the Book of Church Order. And so for the civil magistrate, we need to have that in there to protect our chaplains and so on and so forth. Well, it works the same way with deacons and elders. You might believe that because the deacon is not an office of rule, that's your position, you can ordain women to that office. Well, then you need to make that argument. You need to win that argument in the church courts. What is not permissible in Presbyterianism is for me just to kind of skirt the rules, wink at them, and play word games. That is, that's what the Pharisees did. They played word games. These guys, the Pharisees, who were so offended that Jesus' disciples were taking a little bit of grain on the Sabbath and grinding it up and eating it. But then what they're doing the Sabbath after Jesus is killed? They're going to Pilate and saying, can you make a couple of your police officers work on the Sabbath to seal that tomb and to guard it on the Sabbath? So they're playing word games. We don't need to play word games.
Yeah. And I think there's something, I think the reason why you wouldn't, I'm just, assuming, speculating, I guess it's safe to say, if you probably don't make it an overture to actually change the Constitution because you don't believe that it would likely pass, so if you were, if you're like one of these PCA guys with female deacons or quasi, not ordained but installed deacons, same to me, you're just playing technical games. You very likely wouldn't do that because you don't believe that it would actually work, but then you do it anyway. And I find that to be very detrimental and dangerous, because it's like, we're not going to change the PCA by actually openly through
open statement of the truth,
our courts, right? We're just going to let a practice not to be corny, it reminds you of Lord of the Rings, with the new season that came out on Amazon, and how these people were building underground all this stuff for years they didn't do on the surface, and then eventually, like, after they'd build enough underground where no one knows what's going on, it comes out and it's too late. So it's like you can't come up with this stuff overtly because it will be rejected. So you kind of create this underground system that will get traction covertly, and then eventually, when you get enough traction and enough people are doing this, then it could come to the surface. But that's like that's what cults do. That's what the Mormons do. Like, they have all these kind of like less than open statement of the truth ways to perpetuate stuff. And so I believe that if you have a strong conviction, so-called strong conviction about, female officers as it pertains to deacons, but you don't actually seek to openly pursue that, I don't believe your convictions are actually that strong. If you had strength and conviction in those things, you would, and from the Spirit, right? You'd be like, man, like, this is true. This is right. I believe that, in the Spirit-filled church, leading by the truth and making a case for the truth will actually, be successful. But like, you don't seem to have that confidence in what you're doing. That's why Paul regularly says we renounce like these, less than open ways. Yeah. So if you really were,
Well, I think it was 2021. I believe it was Metro New York put up an overture to open the office of deacon to women, but they withdrew the overture, and I don't know why they did and then didn't. I don't have it in front of me. I think it was. I could be wrong on the details there, but I know there was an overture that was put up that was then withdrawn to open the office of deacon to women. I don't. That'd be a conversation worth having. Why was that withdrawn? And if you believe in something so strongly, why don't you overture to change it? And why aren't you overturing every year?
Yeah,
Why aren't you overturing your presbytery and your presbytery overture General Assembly every year? We need to be able to ordain
yeah,
deacons, or by contrast, we need to not ordain deacons and just install men and women to that office, because it's not, we think, only I mean, that'd be a hard argument to make, that not to ordain deacons at all, because that's what we see in Acts 6, that
yeah,
those men are set apart.
yeah. The doctrine of ordination is very much a vital one, right? Like it's I mean, like the laying of hands, and it has that it's in that covenantal framework where unless somebody through the structures that God has given and in the particular ways that God uh, formalizes things, unless it occurs that way, it's not actually a thing, right? So baptism is a it's a formal oath sign that is about entrance in the covenant communion, and so with God's ways of doing things are always consistent with the covenantal principle and paradigms. And so I feel like informality, recognizing things formally that are informal, it just reminds me of the the way that people think about shacked up with their partners. So like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're acting like we're married, but we're not married. So we're not going through the formality of it. Again, like why do you not go through the formal ways of covenanting with somebody, and why do you call something formal that's not formal without going to formalities? Is because your conscience is not clean, um, and you're being shady. So yeah, and I do believe also that, again, no one the path to egalitarianism is obviously related to the doctrine of creation, and that path, it is not an easy path for confessional folks to do, right? So I doubt that anybody would even consider the idea that we should have female elders. That's just that's absurd, for at least for many. But if you got to start somewhere, right? And so I think when you start with like the deacon thing, because I feel like deacons and elders are interconnected, and the way you process an elder and deacon are interconnected, and you see like how Paul has a conversation in one chapter about both. The way you basically come to female rule in a church is through the less egregious subversion of that, which is the deacon. That's my opinion. I feel like that's where it goes. The idea is that this ends here. I don't believe that that's actually going to be the case. Now you could say, well, in the RPCNA, they allow for female deacons, but they don't.
So wait a minute, Aldo, are you saying that there's a place for someone to go who wants to have female deacons? Like, they wouldn't, like, they're not, they don't have to stay in the PCA. They won't die if they.
That's another point. Like
What?
if you have that value, you can share that.
There's a place, like, so you're saying that there are denominations in this country, they're in North America even, that
Absolutely.
ordain women?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, man.
So they could go somewhere.
Yeah, and some of them are conservative, like the ARP. But I heard,
Wow.
but I heard the ARP is trying to get rid of that.
Well, yeah, maybe trying. Yeah.
The EPC, does that. Echo does that. Who else? I don't know.
Yep. Yeah. PCUSA,
Yeah.
RCA. As I say, the RCA is lovely this time of year. Well, you're to your point where it doesn't stop with the deacon. We saw on social media just a week or two ago, there was an elder from up north who was advocating that we need to make women full members of the General Assembly's standing judicial commission.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know how you would accomplish that other than women as elders, because how can you be a member of a
Yeah.
commission of the General Assembly if you're not
Yeah.
an elder? Now, I know we allow deacons on some of our permanent committees, but again, those are ordained men.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that was the issue with the M&A stuff. Is a few years back that
yeah,
there was
2021.
there was women that had positions in M&A that were not pastoral positions. They weren't ordained positions for the ordained, but they were functioning in the
As
capacity
overseers.
of it's the same. So you may not have something officially, but if you're functioning, like, look, a man may not be my wife's husband, right? May not be me, but he can certainly seek to act like he is, and that would be still inappropriate, you know. So acting like you're something that you're not is still wrong, even though you're not the thing. And I think it's just again, it's just it's the erosion of the things that we have clearly defined through a back door, a side door that is slightly more easily opened than the front door, because the front door obviously is the main door with all the bolts and locks. But anyway, what are you gonna say?
Well, and there's a principle even in common law that, if, let's say you and I are neighbors and I build a shed on my property. Well, what I think is my property, but it's actually 2 feet into over the property line onto your property. And, you come in and you know that, and you say, hey, that's on my property, but that's fine. Well, you can't then 15 years later say, I want you to tear down your barn, your shed, and move it 25 inches. You can't say, because you knew it was there and you said it was fine. So that becomes my property in effect. Well, there's that common law principle bleeds over into church law. That if we are allowing a practice to continue that we know to be aberrant or deviant or not in conformity with what we have stated as our church law and constitution, we can't just then all of a sudden say, hey, wait, now we want to enforce these rules.
Yeah. The more, I would say the more that we see these things and we do nothing about these things, the more we are inevitably subtly codifying these things. You're not codifying it, but you are carrying yourself in such a way that would inevitably lead to that. I think in light of this conversation as well, this related. One of the things I've noticed is an issue in the Presbyterian world is all these people that have pastoral positions, quasi-pastoral positions, like director of this, director of that, but they're not elders. They're not ruling or teaching elders. They're staff. Now, I'm not against having staff in the church. Okay, we have.
Wouldn't you like to have some staff?
Yeah. But it's one thing to have somebody doing the books and have a custodian. It's another thing to have somebody that is doing pastoral work, right? Pastoral work, and they're doing so not as somebody who has been called unto that work. And so you have a lot of these folks, a lot of these churches, particularly the smaller ones, maybe not so much, but like once you get to 200 and above, like you'll have all these people that have quasi-pastoral positions that are not pastors. And the thing is, every Presbyterian church should be led by pastors. And by pastors, we mean elders, we mean overseers, not staff. Certainly not a staff that would not even be able to be ordained. So, for example, like if you're director of this ministry or that is a woman, that she's not even ordainable, right? So at least a man, even though I would argue against that as well, a man is at least potentially ordainable, but again, he's not ordained man. He shouldn't be pastorally leading in the church. but a woman is not even ordainable. And so one of the ways that I think, again, you undermine biblical authority is not necessarily by going against biblical authority, but by creating a biblical authority that's not actually of the word and undermining it that way. So if you, I've seen this a lot. Like a lot of PCA churches, they have Baptist guys that are like campus pastors at a church. There are a ton of them down here, bro. Not say ton. There's more than 1, 2, 3, 4. And these men are campus pastors at a Presbyterian church as Baptists, And if you were to ask them, hey, like, what's going on here? Like, what's that about? How do you have like a guy who's, staffed as a pastor and he's not ordained? And it's like, well, he's not serving sacraments, he's not, regularly preaching on the Lord's Day. He's just, so anyways, man, it's just, it is complicated. And I think it's in the details, in the smaller things under the surface that I think a lot of these things need to be addressed and seen. Another thing that you brought out that I want to get to, because I do want to touch all these points, is pertaining to lady preachers. Why, Ryan? Come on, man. This is a PCA. There's no lady preachers in the PCA. Come on, that's absurd.
Well, maybe just Bible study presenters. Is that what we should call them? They're not preaching. They're just giving a Bible
I see.
study.
So we're seeing a pattern here. Okay, we're seeing a pattern here. They're doing something, but we're calling it something else in order to justify. You know what I find interesting? I've been reading through the Westminster Standards and the notes of the Westminster Standards. And first of all, the Westminster Standards, they do talk about the public reading of the word normally done by a minister, but there's like a little like sentence that says, it says normal, but I guess it would make a case for like it's okay for someone else to read scripture publicly, but it's kind of like vague. But when I was reading the minutes on this, it is cool. You get to see them going back and forth, and yeah, they were saying like, yeah, like only the minister is to be the minister. Now they were talking about teaching elder. Now, okay, we can have a conversation about teaching and ruling elders doing this, but certainly an unordained person entirely is not at all what is in mind in the divines. Not even when it comes to public prayer or the reading of scripture or calls of worship. Certainly not in public exposition. So the bar, I believe, is public preaching in the pulpit, whatever you call it. She's not teaching our theology. She's just teaching about like family. Family is and marriage is in our system of doctrine. I don't know. Anyway, like public preaching is the highest form, I think, of inconsistency. But even in the smaller ones, I think the standards don't allow for that either. So what is there really? Is this really going on? Maybe this is just in one church, like in South Florida. Just in South Florida and Miami. But that is not really happening regularly, is it?
Well, I guess I mean, the Book of Church Order says that the Lord's Supper is to be observed frequently, and some churches interpret that as one time a year. So what is frequently and what is regularly? I guess it depends on which presbytery you're in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, there are in Florida and up north as well. Although I guess if you go that far south in Florida, you've gotten back up north.
Miami was red this year, man.
Yeah, and out west in St. Louis, and then there's but you raise a point about who may read scripture, who may pray, who may issue the call to worship, and it's a matter of the freedom of the believer as well as God's freedom. Now, in worship, the regular principle is all about God's freedom, that he is free not to be worshiped in a way that he has not commanded. But also, with the leading of prayer, if we have a non-ordained person up there, now ordinarily in a congregation's worship service, the people leading the service will have been elected by that congregation, the pastor, the elders who are leading in prayer. But if we bring in someone else, and every church does this occasionally, right, with pulpit supply for a conference. But ordinarily, if we're bringing in people who are not ordained, who have not been elected by that congregation to positions of leadership and service and ministry, elder, deacon, we are imposing those people on that congregation. Because the congregation hasn't said, I respect that man or woman as a leader. So what business does a non-ordained person have reading scripture, explaining scripture, praying? We in the church I serve, we had a situation on the session where we had in the evening, I was inviting any man in the congregation to pray during the corporate worship service. And a couple of the elders said, well, do you really think that that's the way to do that? Shouldn't it be an ordained man? And they laid out their arguments, and I said, yeah, I think that it should be an ordained man, and it shouldn't just be the pastor deciding you're going to pray this week. It should be under the authority of the session.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm guilty. I was guilty of that too, man. Like you don't even look at what I did before I got to Pinelands, and I was a mission church, in the PCA, and I just came in. Like, I mean, I guess not. Someone's probably going to go there and try to look. But one thing I came to realize as I developed and reformed theology is that we're not evangelicals, where the ministry of the word is, or worship. Worship is this, and the ministry of the word is that, or the ministry of the word is just the public preaching. Like the entire service is worship. The entire service is a ministry of the word. And the entire church is governed by those who have been appointed by God and affirmed by the membership. So it's all worship. It's all a ministry of the word, and it can't be segmented and discombobulated. And so I was like, at this point, we have only those who've been called by God, appointed by their church, who lead in the place where the church is being primarily or essentially led, namely in the Lord's Day assembly. So, the call to worship is an ordained man. The public prayer is an ordained man. The preaching and the administration of the sacraments is all of it, because that is who God has entrusted the oversight of the church. And I think I'm just surprised as to how we can have a history that we have, how our church can be our denomination can be literally called presbyteros, and this unordained kind of anarchy. It is very evangelical, it is very much not in our history, has become, it's just shown up in so many different ways in who's leading the service, in the various positions in the church. It's a church that's run, in some sense, we look more like Congregationalists than Presbyterians in how many things unordained people are responsible for. And obviously, preaching is just one thing, But yeah, I've heard all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we're Presbyterians, and we believe that the church is governed by those who've been affirmed and called by God. That's who leads the church, and that's not Susie. That's not Bobby. That's who those elders are. But why do you think? I mean, I understand why people that are not in the PCA have female preachers. Why do we do that here though? Like why would a Presbyterian have a female preacher in the pulpit? Like what could what would possibly inspire someone to do that? What kind of Presbyterian would do that?
I don't even want to speculate. I don't know. I don't
Well, can
know.
I speculate? Can I speculate that they're probably not?
It's your
actually,
podcast.
That they're probably not actually a Presbyterian. Could you say that? I mean, like I think if Presbyterianism is what we've been defining it, and the ministry of the word is only by a particular kind of person. If you believe that anybody, particularly a woman, can administer the word publicly without the authority given by the Lord, then maybe you're not a Presbyterian. Maybe you are an evangelical. You know, maybe you and Rick Warren, got more in common than you realize. You know,
Perhaps, yeah.
Maybe you're simply doing that in order to appear to be modern, and maybe you're doing that to virtue signal to egalitarians in your church. Who knows? Either way, it is absolutely inappropriate to do that. And listen, if anybody's hearing this who's in a PCA church that has female preachers, you need to approach your elders about it. Okay. And if they don't listen to you, you need to approach your presbytery about it. Like that should not happen. It should not happen. There's no way to explain it. There's no way to rationalize it. And it doesn't matter, and even if he had something on there where he said, Ryan said that an ordained man had his wife doing that. Well, if your pastor who's ordained has his wife doing sin in that matter, then you should also deal with that. Like the thing is, in the PCA, members have the power to appeal to courts. And you don't have to feel like other traditions feel that, well, that's what the pastor wants, that's what the pastor does, I guess what it is. You have the rights to appeal to our layered courts, right, Ryan?
Yeah, and and at the church I serve, we've had some situations with folks, and we said, well, if you disagree with us, you are welcome to complain to Presbytery, and we will see what Presbytery says. And they never have. And I think it's because it's a hard thing to do. But Presbyterianism is hard. We are not broad. We have a standard to which we are accountable. And if you don't want to do it the hard way, I think you mentioned there are other places to go, right?
Yeah.
There were these other denominations, someone, Wick Warren or something like that. There are other places that you can go if you don't want to do it the Presbyterian way. Now, we believe that our way is biblical. We believe that for all of the complexities and all of the speed bumps, all of the processes, we believe they're biblical. We believe Jesus has given these to his church because he's the king and the head of the church. He's the only lawgiver in Zion. So these procedures are from, by good and necessary consequence, from the scripture. And why do things take so long in Presbyterianism? Why has Jesus given us a system that required the elders to go down to Jerusalem to sort out that matter in Acts 15? To slow down total depravity.
Yeah.
Total depravity happens. What was it Brad Isbell said? TDH. Total depravity happens. When you can slow things down, when you can get all of the elders there, and when you can get it out in the open, you have a much greater likelihood of coming to a reasonable situation that and you can do so with integrity. But when you're doing something quickly, when you're skirting around the rules, no pun intended with the women preachers, you are at much greater risk of falling to the unregenerate part, to use our confessional language.
Yeah, and I also believe that there is a correlation. There is a correlation between this conversation about male leadership and male functions in the church, all that. There's a correlation between that and the sexuality and homosexuality conversation, because they're both eroding the creational God ordained distinctiveness and its manifestations amongst God's image bearers, male and female, right? And so they're moving into like this more Gnostic, hyper spiritual view of humanity that doesn't have historical embodied situational vocational manifestations. Like, it's just this undefinable concept of what a man is, what spirituality is. And I feel like you'll see it pop up in the sexuality conversation, as well as the egalitarian conversation. And I also believe it's there is this tendency to very much erode our theology from a robust doctrine of creation, and this hype. And I'm grateful for the biblical theologians and all the things they see this theme of Christ-centeredness everywhere in Scripture, and even in the garden we can see the echoes and anticipation of the final garden with but Genesis 1 and 2 is still about men and women getting married and having kids. As much as it is Christological, it is more than simply family and the dominion manual, but it is not less than that. And I feel like one of the disservices, I know we're getting all over the place, of the redemptive historical gospel-centered movement is that some folks tend to find a way of uncreationalizing and unhistoricizing normal life by making a Christ-centered interpretation of a passage. And all of a sudden now, like, I'm a man, I'm a woman, but you look no different, you talk no different, and your church structures and the functionality of the church is virtually indistinguishable, merely categorically and conceptually. Hey, man, in the Old Testament, if a man dressed like a woman and a woman dressed like a man, it was a capital offense. Anyway, so let's go to the last thing here before we kind of go to like the plea for patience, and that is with the sacraments. The sacraments. It's funny. I feel like as we unpack this, it seems like these errors are connected to very important things about our standards, like the minister, right? The officers, the ministry of the word, and how we have also the ministry of the sacraments. Good.
Which is a ministry of the word as well. I mean, which is visible. In worship, we read the Bible, pray the Bible, sing the Bible, hear the Bible, see the Bible in the sacraments.
Yeah. So what's the issue in the PCA with the sacrament? What's going on? What are people doing?
Well, we've got some folks who appear to be practicing pay to communion.
When I read that, I was like, I have never heard that. So unpack that a little bit more. Like, do you mean like, yeah, go ahead, unpack that.
Pay to communion.
When you said that in your article, I was like, do we got some federal visions still here? Are they still around? Because I know there's this guy, and who's that guy? C.R. Wiley. He's a PCA minister over there in Washington, and he's always doing stuff with Moscow folks. He's always in Idaho, and so I'm like, I don't know, maybe there is people that they got some FV in their veins, like is that what you're saying? Like, this is federal visions, or this is just
there is a very, very, very fine distinction that could be made between someone who subscribes to Auburn Avenue, who subscribes to Federal Vision, versus someone who simply believes in pay to communion. Now, often there's some overlap, just like with Federal Vision, there's a lot of overlap with the New Perspectives, but those are two distinct groups. So simply because a person or a session permits or turns
Wait, how about this? How about this? What does this sound like, Ryan? I practice paedo communion, but I don't identify as a federal visionist.
So that sounds very, very modern.
So you're saying that people are in the PCA giving little bits of bread to tiny people,
tiny tots. Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it on multiple videos, multiple worship services. There's very small children. One, I saw one assistant pastor, associate, I don't know, trying to give instructions to the little tot as to how to what to do with this bread, which blows my mind as to why you would think it's appropriate to give a bread and wine to someone who doesn't understand what is going on, such that you have to pantomime, do this with it, and what?
Yeah.
What are we thinking? This is abuse. We're allegedly so concerned about abuse in the PCA. This is child abuse. Giving the elements of the Lord's Supper to those who cannot discern the body, who cannot rightly examine themselves. What are we teaching them? When they do become of an age, when they could examine themselves, will they? Well, how will they understand that if, I've been doing this since I was, before I can remember. This is a problem. This strikes at the vitals of religion. Not just
why does pedo or near pedo communion strike at the vitals of religion? That's an important thought. Why?
If you can't, you're eating and drinking judgment to yourself if you cannot discern the Lord's body rightly.
So it undermines, the third mark of the church. It
undermines the third mark of the church. It undermines the gospel itself.
Yeah, because you don't know the gospel. You can't profess the gospel, and you're participating in the benefits of union with Christ, which is the sign of renewal, right? So So either I feel like it also undermines the doctrine of conversion, regeneration. So I feel like you would only do something like this for two reasons. Either you're towing the line of antinomianism, right? Where the Lord's table doesn't matter where you're at, doesn't matter if you know the Lord, doesn't matter if you're living scandalous or not, like whatever, like come one, come all. It could be that, or it could be that you're a quasi sacerdotalist, right? Who has a view of presumptive regeneration that would be more Lutheran, right? Than Reform, and so whenever I see paedo communion discussed, it's usually related to a wrong view of baptism and the sacraments overall, which we say they're signs and seals of the covenant of grace, right? Which is different than the Lutherans, different than the Catholics. They don't confer or create regeneration. They simply signify and seal the work of Christ to receive by faith. And so there's something there that's seriously wrong, right?
Yes. And to your issue of antinomianism, we've said this is out of bounds in the PCA. There are very few things that the assembly has said are out of bounds with such clarity, and this is one of them. So we and again, there are places to go. There's some people up in Moscow who would love to help you practice that. The PCUSA will allow that to be practiced. I remember when I
Really?
was in
I didn't know that.
yes, yeah, when I was in seminary, I was helping with a little project, and one of my jobs was to call various Reformed denominations, broadly speaking, and find out their position on pay to communion. And I called, Louisville and talked to some nice lady up in the head office of the PCUSA. Oh yeah, we've been doing that for years. I don't even know. It was so commonplace. I don't even think they had a term for it. I had to describe it on the phone. And this was 15 years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah. No,
so I don't remember it super well. But it's just normal. So there are places to go if this is how you want to practice.
yeah. I find that kind of ironic that people that and the PCU say they would even deny the need of regeneration would do something that baptismal regenerationist folks would do. Is maybe there's I don't know, maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's some connection to that. But it wasn't just the pedo communion stuff that you've noticed, which is again, it strikes um, at the doctrine of the marks of the church. It strikes at the doctrine of the church, the visible and invisible distinction. Right? It attacks the actual doctrine of the sacraments. I would say even attacks the doctrine of regeneration. All sorts of stuff, or even repentance. Right? What is repentance? Unto life. Right? All those things are undermined by administering a sign of covenant renewal to those who are unregenerate and have not given any reason to persuade us that there is something there. It's funny. I feel like I don't know, man. Like sacerdotalism is like a thing. I feel like Episcopalianism, Anglicanism, FV. It's kind of like it's cool. Like it's cool now, man. Like all that stuff is cool, and that's fine for it to be cool. But it's like when it comes to Presbyterianism and that stuff, like it's like oil and water, man. It's
Well, we've been there. Right? People think,
yeah,
"Oh, we're getting back to an older way." It's as if they've discovered something new. It's no, we were there,
yeah,
and our forefathers said, "No, we're not going to go there." When
yeah,
I was
and we went to jail for it.
yeah, when
We
I
went
was
to
in
jail for it.
Mississippi, the church I served, beautiful building, uh, wonderfully reformed architecture. But while it was interesting, while they were building their building, they were meeting in an Episcopalian congregation's building, which is full of Second Commandment violations. But the building that the Presbyterians worshiped in bears no resemblance to that. They did not say, "Hey, that's interesting. I like that when we were in the Episcopal Church, they had a picture of the Good Shepherd over there. I want to put one. I want to dedicate a window to that." Now they had stained glass. They had Tiffany stained glass. No images at all.
Yeah, we don't,
They knew why they rejected these things.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But the other issue is you mentioned was the the Baptist dunking of the bread, man. Like the immersion
Jesus took water and made wine, but we have some innovative preachers in the PCA who want to take two elements and make one. I don't understand. We're subtracting elements now.
yeah,
With
and
intention.
and so the it's funny because man, I'm seeing the dots, man, because the Paedo communion, right, in the Greek Orthodox, it's oftentimes attached to intinction.
Well, and growing up in the Lutheran communion, we would often dip the wafer into the wine.
Yeah.
I don't know if it gives folks a more sense of being historically rooted. I don't want to try to examine motives because I can't do that. But the issue that I'm concerned about is
I'm just seeing it now. So we have female officers, female preaching, paedo communion, intinction. Sounds Anglican, bro.
I think we have a good number of Anglicans in the PCA who just don't realize it.
And they're not even the conservative Anglican, because in the Anglican world, like they're a range, right?
Yes.
Bro, when I read the Scottish Reform, like, and I read the men in the assembly, they weren't just bothered by papist stuff. They were bothered by anything that was quasi papist, like the Church of England and many of the things that they did. So you've had some debates about intinction, and I think one thing that I took away from intinction that was key is that if you impose this logic, right? So if the logic that you impose, that, like, what the Lord says, right? Took the bread and then he took the cup, and if you undermine that language and you say, well, that's what it's saying, but it's not what it's really saying, and then you do the same thing with the standards. I feel like if you were to take that logic with those elements and you were to work it out consistently, you would be able to undo every single doctrine in the Bible. That's really what it comes down to. It's take the logic and how you understand the scriptures and our standards that also summarize them. Take the logic and then begin to test it out. And what you'll find is that there won't be anything left of Christianity if the way people arbitrarily play fast and loose with the language of distinguishing the elements, right? And they make them into one. Like if you were to do that consistently, there would be no way to define what a man is, what a woman is, what justification is, because technically it says that, but it could be this, it could be that, and so it's kind of like there's a pattern here. There's a pattern.
Try that with your wife. Well, I know what I said was, but what I really meant was. Try that with your wife. Try that with your children. Try that anywhere else. I know what the law is, but what it really means is this.
Ryan, I don't know about you. Ryan, I don't know about you. I try it all the time. My wife says something, and I hear it a certain way, and I'm like, well, I heard it like this, and it works really well in my marriage.
Yeah. No. Well, and in a sense, I think the church is a marriage. I mean, we're married to Christ the King, but how well is a marriage going to work if some of them are saying, this is what we've agreed to, let's practice what we've agreed, and others say, well, I know this is what it says, but it doesn't say I have to do it that way, or it doesn't say I can't do it a different way. It says do it this way, but it doesn't say don't do it any other way.
And that's
there's again.
Yeah, and bro, what I noticed too, like another issue in the PCA is there's a biblicist hermeneutic, and there's somewhat of a butchering up of good and necessary consequence or inference, where God literally does not have to literally say certain things that are mandated, right? Like you can deduce, right, and infer. And so, God doesn't have to say, well, you said, don't murder, but you didn't say, don't swing a hammer at somebody's head. God doesn't have to spell everything out, right? Like you can infer and deduce from all the scriptures, like consequences, right? So God didn't tell women to do communion in the New Testament. God didn't tell us to put water on babies, God didn't tell us to have an order of worship. Like there's so many things that are not stated obtusely, but they certainly are mandated inferentially and deductively in light of what all Scripture says as one covenantal unit. And some things that God has commanded explicitly are not to be explicitly obeyed. So, for example, I don't wash people's feet in church. I don't tell women
that wasn't normative.
Yeah, I don't tell women to wear head coverings. I don't tell people to greet each other with a kiss because I can infer and deduce, right?
What's normative and what's contextual.
So it's funny, like, but in the PCA, like there's these people that just tend to, well, technically that's not what it says, and technically it didn't say that you couldn't do that. But remember, like, we're people that have very much coined this concept of RPW, and the Bible doesn't have to simply say, well, I haven't prohibited this, so therefore it's fine. Like, you know, in the RPW, which is very much in our roots, it's God has said this, and since he has said this and not said that, like, this is what we do, right? But the second that whatever God has not said we couldn't do becomes what we can do, then, okay, well, God didn't say I can't do backflips with a chimpanzee in a church service. So since he didn't say that, I can do that. I mean, it's absurd to actually believe that this is how a churchman ordained by God could actually process the scriptures. And so I think your concerns are not concerns that are of the first of, well, some of them, let's say generally speaking, they're not first importance concerns. Like, the gospel is not being corrupted in its core doctrines, but I would say that all of these things, they have a corridor directional connection to that, right? I think that's what.
Well, antinomianism is a threat to the gospel. That, yes, you may not by your words undermine the gospel, but by your actions, you might truly be undermining the gospel. If by your action you're saying that I don't have to repent, that I don't have that there's no holiness of life that follows. Well, we can see that in ecclesiastical relations as well. That, well, I don't have to follow the rules because, well, we're under grace and not under law.
Yeah. So there is a, if you keep opening the doors of this then that error, then eventually, like, you'll close the door to the gospel if you keep opening these doors and you keep walking through them. But you concluded, and this is where we'll end. You concluded your second article, Substack, was about patience. Hey, no time to tap out, no time to leave. Explain that. You know, maybe you could help me because I think a lot of guys have good reasons to want to not be patient and leave. So come on, help us out here, man.
Well, it's a hard thing that we are engaged in. You know, I think a lot of churches, a lot of elders were not paying a great deal of attention to what was happening at the General Assembly level. And, you know, if you don't go to General Assembly, if you don't vote at General Assembly, then you have no say over who runs the agencies, who sits on the permanent committees and boards of our denomination, and you have no say over who sits on the Standing Judicial Commission. Well, the last 3 or 4 assemblies, people have been woke up and are electing guys who hold to a more robust view of our Westminster standards. Well, you can't undo a decade's worth of elections in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be patient.
Stop there for a second and remember to keep going where you're going. So, because I think that's a really good point. So you're basically saying, like, that there's things that you have seen recently, in particularly into who is where, that will manifest themselves inevitably, though they have not yet. There are people in places that weren't in places.
Yeah,
that will bear fruit. That's a good one. Go ahead.
Well, you know, in secular politics in this country, you know, we get a new House of Representatives every 2 years. People may think the PCA is like that. Well, the PCA, our church courts, and the committees of the General Assembly are more like the Senate, where a portion of them are elected every year. But in order to bring reform to those agencies, takes several years, just like the United States Senate, or similar to it. So let's be patient. Let's tap the brakes. Let's see how we can uh, continue to put men who have a robust commitment to the Westminster standards on the Standing Judicial Commission, on the committees and agencies. And with some of our uh, agencies, are they planting Presbyterian churches? That's a question that I've asked publicly on a platform, and was promised an answer, never got an answer. And how many presbyteries and how many Presbyterian churches have been planted by the PCA abroad? I don't know. I mean, I know there's one in Honduras. I know there's one in Colombia. But overall, we have hundreds and hundreds of missionaries. How many of them are actually church planters? How many Presbyterian churches has the PCA planted overseas? I
Yeah.
can't get an answer to that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because your article is right around the time that there was this article on Aquila Report. Do you read that one about?
Oh yeah, the Aquila.
So that one was more gloomy than yours. Right?
That, yeah. Well, I am just an optimist. I came from the ELCA, the Petticoat Lutheran Church, and now I'm in the PCA. And what a world of difference and beauty and grace I have now. So, I'm an optimist about the PCA because of my own heritage. So,
Okay.
if we want to see change,
I like that
time.
word. I like that word, optimism.
But patience, but also perseverance, and that's my second remedy. That we have to stay engaged. We have to continue to contend for the faith. It's not just, we had 2 or 3 good years, now we should expect things to be good. No, you've got to still budget money to send your elders to General Assembly, and more importantly, send your elders to Presbytery.
Yeah.
Presbytery.
Yeah. I was just, participation in all the courts is very important. I was talking to some people about this because they've gone to Presbytery with me over in South Florida, and some of the guys that were there, they were talking and they were like, man, this Presbytery has got major issues. And I was like,
is that the one that David Barry's in charge of? You can blame him.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, but if you would have came here 3-4 years ago, it was very different. And it's actually, there's a lot of things that are better about it. And so I think if you can tangibly see things that are improving, then it gives you reason to, not pull the plug. Right. And I think you brought up some valid points. I could see some things where I am. But I also think I'm very encouraged by guys in their between 20 and from the 20s to 40s. I feel like there's a lot of guys in that category that I think are got a lot of guts, a lot of clarity, a lot of conviction, and I please don't take this the wrong way, anyone listening. I think the young guys are way more confessional than the older guys are. A lot of them, and
that's the way it's always been in the PCA.
Really,
yeah. In my someone who studied this further might know better, but you had Morton Smith at Belhaven College, and then he went over to RTS Jackson, RTS then, and the guys that were coming out in the 60s and then in 73, the educations, the theological educations that they had, if they went to one of the PCUS schools, they didn't get a thoroughly reformed education. And so some of them went to DTS or had a Moody background. And so, again, they weren't reformed. They were dispensationalists. But they wanted to be. They were as reformed as they could be.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have a professor of theology like Morton Smith, who is educating the next generation of ministers in the Westminster Standards. And in fact, the Assembly adopted a number of the papers written by Dr. Smith on subscription, and so they wanted to be a confessional denomination. They didn't know how, because the PCUS was so broad. They didn't know how, but they knew the Westminster Standards was the way. As you have that first generation of elders and teaching elders and ruling elders coming out of RTS, and they're affecting Reformation and moving the PCA at that point closer to our confessional standards. And that's the way it's always been in the PCA, that we are returning. We are a continuing church, but we're returning to the old school after it had been so corrupted by the deviations in the PCUS. So I think it's always been, and so I'm encouraged. And you look at the seminaries that are producing ministerial graduates. You look at the number of graduates from RTS, from Greenville, from Westminster, and you compare them to other seminaries, maybe a seminary in St. Louis, and the number of graduates that they're having, and then how many of them are actually coming into the PCA. I am so encouraged by the pool of ministers. And then you look at where they're going. Zach Groff on PCA Polity has done a great work on ministers and churches that have left the PCA and where they're going. There's great reason to be patient and to persevere, to continue to hold men accountable to the vows that we've made. Yeah. So I think the future of the PCA is bright.
Good stuff, man. Well, thank you for your time here, and thanks for
having me.
Yeah, your writing ministry. Thank you for your overtures. That the stuff that comes out of your session. Like those are they're good, man. Thank you for your moments on the mic, man. I like them. So, are you going to GA this June?
I am registered. I have. I got 3 hotel rooms, so I'll be selling.
I always get an Airbnb, man. I don't like the hotels, man, because we come with a group of guys. So I got an Airbnb with like a rooftop, man, a rooftop with like couches. Yeah, man.
Gonna have a party.
I think so. So anyways, appreciate your time. Hopefully,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, hopefully this conversation about how to process just the smaller things that are connected to our doctrines would be helpful to you. Please, if you are in agreement with us, do your part in moving people to faithfulness and obedience. Do so in your prayers, do so in your conversations, and do so in your courts. Don't just, man, that was a great podcast. Good combo. Beezy's a beast. Like do something for the Lord and his church as you're fed mentally about these things. So, signing off, grace and peace, Kingdom Polemics.